Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, could there be changes to the military justice system? We talked to a senator trying to make that happen. Plus, a very special tour of one man's destroyer namesake. And how are NATO navies training to keep the Black Sea safe? We get an inside look. And later in the show, our weekly reporters roundup from our team of reporters and editors. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. We have a great show for you this week, starting with developments on Capitol Hill. The defense budget process is often an annual slog through various programs, equipment purchases, and spending priorities that can make the eyes glaze. But this year, lawmakers have injected some potential changes to how the military justice system works. To talk about those updates, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane spoke to one of the champions altering how sexual assault cases are handled in the military.
It's time for us to move serious crimes like sexual assault and murder out of the chain of command and put them in the hands of the most capable people in the military to do this. A commander who knows both the accuser and the victim cannot remove bias from decision making.
Congress is poised to make major changes to the military justice system this year, taking serious crimes out of the traditional chain of command. We sat down with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, chairwoman of the Senate Armed Services Personnel Subcommittee, to talk about what her proposal includes and what it means for service members. Senator, thanks for sitting down with us here. I want to talk about the military justice improvements, reforms that you have in NDAA and the Military Justice Improvement Act that you've been an author of. Talk to me about why this is so important for your average service members. I know there's been a lot of focus on the help that this gives to victims, the reforms it does, but if I'm an average soldier or just a sailor, why should I care about what this is?
These are reforms that honor the service of our men and women. The men and women of our military sacrifice so much. They deserve a military justice system that's worthy of that sacrifice. One that's fair, one that's highly professionalized, and one that takes serious crimes seriously. And I think this is a bill that helps the whole process. Whether you're a plaintiff or a defendant, any serious crime is now going to be taken seriously with no bias. So instead of having the system where the commander decides which cases go to trial, trained, military, unbiased prosecutors outside the chain of command will now decide which serious crimes should go to trial. That independence, that professionalized review will strengthen our military justice system and make it a fairer, better process for everyone.
You've talked a lot about just how sweeping these changes are, but you've also said in the past that you don't see this as a real upheaval to the justice system. You think this can be done in a relatively short
way.
Yeah. So I mean, you don't think that we need a lot more prosecutors? Just explain what that's gonna.
So today, we reserve the ability to make a decision on general courts martial to very senior commanders, level 06 and above. And there's about 200 that currently make those decisions for all of the military. And so what our bill does is when the military police complete an investigation of a serious crime, instead of that case file going to the commander's JAG, it's going to go to a senior JAG outside of the chain of command to make a decision about whether or not there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. If that trained independent military prosecutor decides there's not enough evidence, then the case file goes right back to the commander and the commander's personal JAG, who would normally handle the case. So it's a very small change. And we have more than enough senior lawyers about the same number as we have of 06 commanders and above who have the convening authority, about the same number. So we have the same number of staff that are needed, the same seniority, they just are independent of the chain of command of the victim and the accused.
Now, do you worry at all that DoD may try and drag its feet on this change after you do it because of some of the complexity and because of their resistance? We've already seen that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said that he'd like to see just the sexual misconduct crimes taken out and not all serious crimes. Your proposal goes further. So do you worry about that friction?
Well, if they read the bill for what it is and actually understand the change is simple, is very simple. It's which lawyer's desk does the case file go to first. That's all it is. And this independent military prosecutor will make a judgment, and if he chooses not to take this case to trial, it goes right back to the commander. So it changes very little. Second, yes, they may drag their feet. And to limit it just to sex crimes means that only one type of plaintiff and only one type of defendant is getting this professionalized, independent, unbiased review. And if you're going to reform the military justice system, why wouldn't you reform it for all serious crimes? Why wouldn't you reform it for all plaintiffs and all defendants in cases that are very complex? If it's a serious crime with more than 1 year of penalty if convicted, that means it's a complex, serious crime that deserves this professionalized review. So arguably, you'd want to do it for all serious crimes.
Now that it looks like we're headed towards at least some change, what have you heard from the folks who've been advocates for this? I mean, this has been a years-long fight for you, a years-long fight for them. What have they been saying? What emotions are they going through right now?
So they feel grateful that Congress is finally listening to them. This bill was written 8 years ago with the voices of survivors and veterans. This bill is supported by every survivor group, every veterans organization, from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association to the Vietnam Veterans Association to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. This is something that is multi-generational and uniformly supported by our veterans advocacy groups and our sexual assault survivor groups, because they know that through professionalization and through independence that their chances at justice are higher. Unfortunately, over the last 8 years, nothing's gotten better. The rate of sexual assault still estimated by the military at 20,000. The rate of people coming forward, unfortunately, is declining, and the rate of conviction is declining over the last few years. And so it's problematic. We need, again, a professionalized system where the review is not based on the whims or views or anecdotal view of any one commander. They're based on evidence, and that's all a survivor or a defendant could ask for. Evidence-based review. It's the fairest system, and I think it will help to convict more sexual predators, which will mean a message is sent that this crime actually isn't tolerated and that you will be convicted. And not only do you take out every time you take out a predator, who often are recidivists, you're going to tell other potential predators this crime is not tolerated.
Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
The House will unveil its changes to the military justice system sometime in September, but the final Defense Authorization Act isn't expected to be passed until later this fall. Reporting from Capitol Hill, I'm Leo Shane.
And finally, a World War II Navy vet and wife of a Master Chief who had a guided missile destroyer named after him received a special tour at Naval Station Mayport in Florida. Emma Black, a former member of WAVES, or Women Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Services, was asked what she would like for her 100th birthday. Her answer? A ride in a Navy helicopter. The Navy obliged, and Black received the ride and an aerial tour of the boat named after her husband, the USS Delbert D. Black. It doesn't get better than that. Ima was also made an honorary Master Chief Petty Officer, the same rank as her late husband. And that's it from the military this week. When we come back, we learn how NATO is keeping the Black Sea safe.
The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies.
We're live. You're on in 3.
Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, Get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams. NATO ships from 14 nations just wrapped up Exercise Seabreeze in the Black Sea. Defense News' very own Megan Eckstein was there and joins us now to tell us more about the exercise.
Seabreeze is an annual exercise that takes place in the Black Sea. The U.S. and Ukraine host this annual exercise, which dates back to 1997. And the basic premise of Seabreeze is that U.S., Ukraine, and other NATO allies and partners in the region get together and practice basic operations together. They practice communicating, they practice maneuvering in close quarters, just the basic blocking and tackling of working together in the Black Sea as a naval task group and coming together and being sure that they can operate with one another. Seabreeze 21 had a maritime component to it, which included American destroyer USS Ross leading a naval task group at sea in the Black Sea. It also included a NATO maritime task group participating as well. In addition to the maritime component, the Ukrainian naval base actually had a sunken yacht that had been blocking a good portion of the naval base and preventing its ships from pulling up to the pier. So there was a big diving component to this year. Basically, they sent divers down under the water, primarily U.S. divers, but also Ukrainian and other NATO nations. And they broke into pieces this sunken yacht and pulled it up and actually freed the harbor, which was a very interesting demonstration of that particular warfighting capability. Nearby, there were also Marines and naval infantry forces ashore that were working together to ensure that they could come together for a ground battle if called upon. And of course, there was an air component, air drills over land as well as over the Black Sea. And really the idea of all of the pieces was to prove that US, Ukrainian, and NATO forces can come together regardless of the mission, and they have the capabilities of working alongside one another with common practices to meet a common goal. Tensions have been simmering in the Black Sea ever since 2014 when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. And while those tensions have been simmering for years now, this year has been especially tense since Russia flowed significant amount of forces to the Ukraine border and to the Black Sea earlier this year in what they called their own military exercises. While NATO and the US were monitoring that, plans for the Seabreeze 21 exercise were already ongoing, and though the exercise is pre-planned and not technically in response to Russia and their movement of military forces towards Ukraine, there's no denying that that tension with Russia had a big impact on this year's Seabreeze 21 exercise in the Black Sea and added another element to the exercise, showing that interoperability with Ukraine also meant that NATO and the US could respond to tensions in the area if called upon. Even though the Seabreeze 21 exercise is meant to focus on the mechanics of interoperability between navies, it also sends a larger message.
I think that the importance of Seabreeze is to demonstrate our collective resolve for a peaceful and stable Black Sea region. And of course, the Black Sea, just like every other international body of water, doesn't belong to one particular nation. It belongs to the world. And all of us out here demonstrate our commitment to that shared objective of making the international waterways available to everybody.
That message goes to the Russian Navy. While aboard USS Ross as a participant in the Seabreeze 21 exercise, I was able to see 4 Russian ships following the destroyer pretty much the entire duration of the exercise. Russia was very clearly monitoring what the US ships and its NATO allies were doing in the Black Sea with aircraft overhead and with ships in the water, and just making their presence known while this international exercise was happening. Though there were no aggressive incidents while the US destroyer was in the Black Sea, when the US isn't around, Russia has been known to try to harass Ukrainian naval ships. The Ukrainian Navy has much smaller patrol boats in their fleet, and particularly looking back to 2018 in the Kerch Strait, Russia went so far as to capture 3 Ukrainian vessels as well as the 24 sailors on board. So when Ukraine is alone in the Black Sea and in the Sea of Azov, the tensions are much higher and really highlights the need to have NATO partners and allies in the region who can back up Ukraine and help them defend their territorial sovereignty. Ukraine would love to join NATO and is taking steps now to get their military and to get their government ready for NATO membership. Being a NATO member would, of course, provide them a greater sense of stability, a greater sense of security, knowing that they would have allies who would come to their defense if Russia attacked. However, with that goal still being potentially years off, Ukraine really looks to these Sea Breeze exercises as a message to Russia that they have friends in the region who have their back, and B, as a way of proving that their Navy can fall in with larger naval groups if they needed to defend their shorelines, if they needed to defend their borders in any type of naval battle in the future.
The Ukrainian Navy has accepted delivery of the first Bayraktar TB2 drone from Turkish defense company Baykar. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense announced the delivery in July through its official Twitter account. After completing acceptable tests, the drone, along with mobile control terminals and spare parts, will be deployed at the Ukrainian Navy's 10th Naval Aviation Brigade in Mykolaiv. Baykar announced in 2019 that it won a $69 million contract to sell 6 TB2 combat UAVs to Ukraine. Turkish officials at the time said the deal included ammunition for the armed drones. The Ukrainian Navy's Chief of Staff Oleksiy Nespapa previously said the combat UAVs are expected to be delivered by the end of 2021. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency has opened its first unclassified laboratory in St. Louis, continuing the agency's push for collaboration with commercial and non-traditional partners. While NGA has unclassified areas within some of its facilities, Moonshot's lab is unique that it was designed to be open from the very beginning. Industry leaders in the geospatial intelligence space have said that the classification requirement companies need to meet in order to work with the intelligence community are onerous, even when much of the work is technically at the unclassified level. In response, the agency has expressed interest in connecting more of its work in the unclassified space, and the work-from-home reality of the COVID-19 pandemic pushed it to adopt new practices that encourage more work at the unclassified level. NGA Director Vice Admiral Robert Sharp said last year that many of those new practices would become the norm. Located in downtown St. Louis, the new Moonshot Labs will encompass 12,000 square feet of shared workspace. A U.S. Army National Guard unit is set to get its first Victor model Black Hawk this month, according to a top aviation officer. The UH-60V converts a Lima model Black Hawk from an analog cockpit to a digital one, intended to better match the capabilities of a Mike model, the latest variant of the helicopter. Redstone Defense Systems won an Army contract to take the Northrop Grumman's cockpit design and integrate the technology into the V model prototypes in spring 2014. The Army partnered with Corpus Christi Army Depot, Texas, to convert L models into the new V models at a rate of 48 aircraft per year, which some have called too slow, as it would take 15 years for the service to produce all 760 aircraft. The Army has been looking at ways to speed that up. And do you know the difference between consolidation and refinance student loans? Well, you will after this week's Money Minute, and that's coming up after the break.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks some of the basics of managing student loan debt.
If you're like many who have 2 or more student loans with different providers, you know firsthand how difficult it is to keep track of your loans and how much you owe. But did you know that you can simplify your loans and your life? And thankfully, it's not as hard as staying on top of all those loans. Start by getting organized. Know who you owe, how much, and when. Write it down so you can refer to it easily. Now it's time to streamline. Find out about consolidating all your loans into one new loan, so you're paying one interest rate and one monthly payment. Some lenders may even allow you to consolidate and refinance your federal and private student loans, which can be a huge relief. Refinancing with a private lender can be another great option. It would replace your current loan with a new one and possibly lower your payment or get you a better interest rate. But remember, if you have federal student loans, the perks of your federal loan won't be available after refinancing. Bottom line, don't struggle with multiple loans. Simplify by either refinancing or consolidating. Talk to a pro to find out which is best for you, and finally, breathe easier.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our coverage, be sure to check out our headlines online at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. And to be the most up-to-date person in your unit, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief for headlines in your inbox every weekday. And make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And when we come back, the Military Times team of reporters and editors breaks down the biggest stories of the week. President Joe Biden announced Monday that U.S. troops will no longer serve combat roles in Iraq. Is it symbolic or strategic? We discussed this at our Reporters Roundtable, and more from this week's headlines.
Welcome back to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable, where we bring you the inside stories behind the week's biggest headlines. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times. With me again this week are Megan Myers, our Pentagon Bureau Chief, and Howard Altman, our Managing Editor. Good to see you both again. Thanks for coming on. Our first topic of the week concerns Iraq. President Joe Biden just announced the United States will end its combat mission there by the end of the year under a new agreement with the Iraqi Prime Minister. That's going to come as a surprise to a lot of troops, though, since there really hasn't been direct combat there for quite some time. Howard, you were following this closely this week. Explain what's going on and what troops need to know about this.
Well, as you said, Leo, President Biden and Iraqi Prime Minister Kadhimi came to an agreement and announced that by the end of the year, the U.S. combat mission in Iraq will no longer exist. That is what that really means is unclear because the U.S. has not been involved in combat operations on the ground in Iraq in quite some time. There's still airstrikes that are carried out, but on the ground, it's been several years since the U.S. had forces on the ground involved in combat. This is more adjusting the reality on the ground. It could be to help Kadhimi, who's up for re-election, his election coming up in Iraq. So what that means to the troops on the ground, I talked to several defense officials who say that no plans have been made, no orders have been changed, nothing yet has taken place that would change anything. And again, that's been the way it has been for a while.
Megan, what's the reaction down at the Pentagon in this? There's about 2,500 troops right now that are in Iraq. Does this really change anything for them at the moment?
It doesn't really, and the Pentagon hasn't really had much to illuminate or push back on this characterization that combat troops are leaving Iraq because, as Howard said, the mission really hasn't been combat for a number of years. It's mostly train, advise, assist of the Iraqis so that they can lead their own combat missions against ISIS. And then there's a small contingent of special operators who will do targeted missions. That's not expected to go away. The de-ISIS mission is not over. That's not part of this announcement. And so there will still be troops going to Iraq. It's just sort of a change in name only as far as anyone can tell right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because it still leaves the administration a lot of wiggle room on what to do if there are problems, if we see that resurgence in ISIS. But kind of confusing for a place that a lot of the public hasn't paid attention to in a while. A lot of the military has been focused there still with troops on the ground. But I think this came as kind of an odd wake-up call to the public that there are still U.S. military presence in Iraq. So let's shift to another story that's causing some anxiety in military circles, and that's a story about a report out of Fort Hood that's Fort Hood officials are investigating about 100 night vision goggles that have gone missing from a repair shop, assumed to be stolen at this point. Howard, how does military equipment like this just go missing?
Well, that's what the folks at CID at Fort Hood would like to know. They're looking at the theft of more than 100 of these night vision goggles. These are worth several $1,000s a piece. Now, they're not the latest version of this technology, but still, it's something that folks like the Taliban like to get their hands on. It's a game changer if you're operating at night. Various bad guys wouldn't mind having. And frankly, there's collectors, people who like to go around LARPing and playing, soldier at night, wouldn't mind having those and paying, a few $1,000s. The CID at Fort Hood is looking into this situation. That's a lot of night vision goggles to go missing at one time.
Yeah, I mean, they may be an older model, but they're nicer than the pair of goggles I've got for swimming over here. So, Megan, what's the reaction, from the military community on this? It seems like every couple of months we hear one of these stories of either, equipment that's unaccounted for or equipment that's stolen. I mean, this seems really odd for highly sensitive equipment to just go missing.
Unfortunately, equipment does go missing, probably more for negligence, and accidentally than for dastardly purposes generally. But it does happen. From a repair shop is a little sketchy because you wouldn't expect that, maybe, a squad was accidentally went and locked them up, put them in storage somewhere and just didn't do the paperwork for accountability. Now we don't know where they are. It does seem as if somebody knew, there would be a lot there and that they could move them all quickly, and maybe it wouldn't be as guarded as some other containers where you would find equipment. So it'll be interesting to see who's responsible and where they ended up.
Yeah, clearly one we're going to be watching for a while here. Listen, thanks to you both for coming on today. We'll be covering all of these stories in the weeks to come and the days to come. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.